Now it's time for today's perspective. And Far-Right France, that is the title of a panel discussion that's being held tonight here in Paris at the American Library. Now the panel is set to talk about the past, the present and the future of France's far-right movements. Crucial here, of course, in France, as we have presidential elections in exactly a year's time, that the far-right is riding high in the polls for, but can they actually go all the way and finally, after years of trying, actually win? Well, let's ask that question to one of the panelists tonight. Victor Mallet is senior editor at the Financial Times, author of Far-Right France, Le Pen, Bardella and the Future of Europe. It's just been published at the start of the year, in fact. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme today. Let's start by putting that question to you. I mean, do you think the far-right can win in the presidential elections in a year's time?
I think they definitely can, yes. I mean, we have an extraordinary situation where I've been told, by people in Paris, there's no way they can win because the French people dislike them too much, because Bardella is too young and inexperienced, Le Pen is has been too long in politics. But that's exactly the kind of thing that people were saying in London at the time of Brexit 10 years ago. A lot of the great and good, so to speak, the establishment, we didn't think, I suppose, that people would vote for Brexit, and they did. And that same year, a lot of people on the left and in the center of politics and even the traditional right didn't think that Trump would get elected, and he was elected, and then he was elected again. So I think we have to be very careful. Liberals and the left and the centrists, they have to be very careful of complacency and assuming that this can't happen, because all the polls show that they are far, far in the lead, Le Pen and Bardella, in the presidential election, and therefore quite likely to win a subsequent legislative election in the National Assembly. So yes, we have, I think, a very strong probability that they could win.
There's a big thing against them, though, isn't there? I mean, as you say, they're riding high in the polls, almost certain, virtually certain that they're going to come out on top in the first round. But crucially here in France, there's a second round, isn't there? And generally what happens is everybody who doesn't want the far right to take power clubs together, whether they're from the left or from the right, to block them. I mean, isn't that just going to happen again?
Yes, I mean, there certainly will be that attempt. And that's why Jordan Bardella in particular is very keen on bringing the undecideds, if you like, the people from the centre-right, into the fold of the far right. And that's already happened to some extent. I mean, in 2024, Eric Ciotti, who's now the mayor of Nice, I mean, he defected from the LR, Les Républicains, the centre-right party, with 16 of his MPs essentially, and is now part of the far-right alliance. So it's more likely now than it was in the past that the kind of Front Républicain, this attempt to gang up on the far right, will fail. And that's partly because the left is very divided. I mean, a party, the far-right party, the FN, as it then was, the Front National, was always considered very anti-Semitic, but now you find a lot of Jewish voters are voting for the RN, and the anti-Semitic party that is being frozen out by a lot of people for that, or the party considered to be anti-Semitic, is the far-left party, La France Insoumise. So, the situation has changed quite dramatically in the last 20, 30 years, and we've seen over those decades that very steadily and solidly the far-right is just getting more and more support. I mean, the last presidential election in the second round, Marine Le Pen got 41.5%. So she needs, 8.5 percentage points more, or Bardella, who's perhaps more likely to be the candidate, they need more. And the signs are that they will get more. The question is whether they will get 50.1% of the vote in that second round. Yeah, but it's notable that they are virtually certain to be in the second round, and no other party is definitely, or no other party is as likely to be in the second round as the far right is.
Is that crucial, do you think? Because there's that big decision to be made, isn't there, whether it's going to be Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella, partly dependent on Marine Le Pen being able to overturn her court case.
Yeah, on July the 7th, we'll hear the judgment. I think either of them have a very good chance. In the polls, actually, it shows that Bardella is slightly more popular than Marine Le Pen herself. But probably when push came to shove in an election, his youth would count against him. But either of those two have a very, very high chance of being in the second round. And the question is, who is in, as you were suggesting earlier, who's in the second round with them? I think if it's a centre-right candidate, like Edouard Philippe, the mayor of Le Havre, who was Macron's prime minister for 3 years, then that is the best chance for the rest of France, if you like, the opponents of the far right, to win against the far right. But if it's someone from the left or the far left, it's much less likely that that person will be able to beat Le Pen or Bardella.
And what about the two of them themselves? I mean, their personal relationship. I mean, do you think they do get on, or are they just putting it on for the cameras? Because there must be intense rivalry in some ways, mustn't there, between the two of them?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, it obviously started off that Bardella was sort of plucked out of obscurity by Le Pen. He was completely her protege. He was utterly loyal to her. But as the years have gone on, of course, that they have shown their differences. And there are policy differences that are quite interesting, I think, that are beginning to appear. So far, they've managed to sort of paper them over and not make a big deal of it. But that's definitely a potential for the future that you'll see divisions. I mean, for example, over the war in Ukraine, where Bardella is much more forthright in condemning Russia. Le Pen has links to Putin from the past, and there are other issues where they differ. For example, on the economy, where Bardella's slightly more keen on the private sector, lowering taxes and having less of a sort of state-dominated economy than Le Pen, who has a much more kind of left-wing style economic policy that is traditional for the far right.
The panel tonight is also very focused on the history of the far right. Of course, the brand became rather toxic here in France under Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, right through the 70s, right through to the 90s. I mean, how has she been able to change the perception away from that perception that it had at the time, do you think?
Well, that's her big success story, is that she has dédiabolisé, that's to say, detoxified the party very successfully over the past 10, 15 years or so. So any sort of trace of any obvious trace of Nazism or fascism or racism, she's really managed to suppress that in quite a successful way. And the party is normalized. And the fact that, more than a third of the French people support it shows, and it is the biggest single party in the French National Assembly. It's the biggest single party in the European Parliament. So this is not a fringe party, and that is largely down to her. She really did succeed in sort of getting rid of the toxicity. The anti-Semitism, for example, is a very good example of that, where she has been courting and successfully courting Jewish voters on the right. So yeah, that's her big legacy, I think, if you like, to the party, that she has detoxified it. She has made it electable. And I've been around the country. I mean, part of the book is really going around the country, just talking to voters. And the far right voter today is not your sort of typical the image that the Brits or the Americans might have of the kind of far right voter as a kind of neo-fascist skinhead thug. It's just not that at all. It's ordinary people who are worried about the economy. They're not always that concerned about immigration. So immigration isn't always the top issue. Quite often it's the way the economy is going. So and these are accountants, bakers, butchers, civil servants, all kinds of people. So it's not a fringe party anymore. It is a mainstream party, even if it sits on the far right of the political spectrum. And that is, I think, largely the legacy of Marine Le Pen.
Wanted to ask you as well about your book, Le Pen, Bardella and the Future of Europe. I mean, Europe, of course, is crucial to this as well, and what happens with the whole of Europe and France's place within Europe afterwards.
Well, the implications are enormous for Europe. If you have a Rassemblement National government in France, especially if they also control the National Assembly as well as the presidency, it will have huge implications for the EU in particular, especially if you have some kind of far right presence in a government in Germany next door. I mean, these are the two sort of core members of the EU at the moment, and historically. And what I think the RN would try to do, the French side, would be to sort of undermine Europe from within. That is to say, get rid of all the kind of centralizing regulations that control everything from sort of pesticide use to energy prices, and basically just leave it as a kind of husk of a federal group of, a loosely federal group of states that have some common interests but really don't dictate centrally what should be done. And that, of course, is an enormous change for the European Union, which is increasingly sort of running the European economy and so on. So and it would also have a big effect on NATO, of course, because there are doubts about how committed the Rassemblement National is to the NATO vision. Of course, NATO is already under threat from the United States and the divisions with Europe, but that's another part of the way an RN government would completely change the sort of international picture with France in Europe and France in NATO.
Victor Mallet, thanks very much for joining us on the programme today. Good to have you with us. We even ran out of time to talk about the other name, which has been at the bottom of the screen through Eric Zemmour, the other candidate on the far right as well. But no time left. Good to have you with us on the programme today. Thanks very much for joining us. As I said, taking part in a panel here in Paris a little bit later on today.